The sixth way prayer can appear to work without a God is the misunderstanding of events. You may have misinterpreted something as being far worse than it was, prayed about it, and since it was mostly benign of a problem, went away on its own, and then you consider that a success. Basically, your prayer supposedly solved something that didn't exist in the first place. Additional ways for mistaking unanswered prayer for answered prayer may exist, but this list should be a good start. Let's move on to stage 3, memory storage. Human memory is incredibly fallible, to the point where eyewitness testimony in court cases is poorly regarded. Would it surprise you to know that you've forgotten most of your life? Do you remember what you were doing 5 years ago today, as though it were yesterday? What about for the month? We remember broad generalizations, generic imagery of places and people, but the vast majority of the memory of our second-by-second life is gone. Most of it wasn't particularly important anyway. This is a key component to the engine. Your brain is utterly bombarded with information. Every pebble, every stick, every leaf that you walk past when strolling through the woods is registered at the moment. Everything you look at or smell or hear or feel, the brain processes and is aware at the instant of perception. 5 minutes later, that data is gone. Gone forever from your mind, with only the broadest generalizations remembered. Yet that sign you passed on the trail, that had a smiley face spray painted on it, may linger in your memory for years. Why is that? Your brain has a bouncer. It's kind of like the bouncer at the entrance to a club. His or her job is to only allow important or valid people into the club, and everyone else is turned away. Your brain has finite storage capacity and has to be selective about what's remembered. The bouncer is the primary mechanism for that task. Only store what's deemed important. It's not perfect, but it works fairly well. Know what I just said. It allows data that is deemed important. There's no law of physics which dictates what information is important or not. It all comes down to you and what you think is important. Many of what you would otherwise have considered failed prayers were essentially relabeled as neutral. Do you know what you've done by relabeling failed prayers as neutral prayers? You've deemed those results unimportant. Those unimportant results try to get into your memory, and the bouncer takes one good look at them and shoves them aside. In the end, you won't remember most of them. This overall effect has a name in psychology: confirmation bias. The next stage is stage 4, the efficacy audit. At the end of the day, you'll look back at your past experiences with prayer. You'll look at how well the current results have panned out, and look at how well it's worked in the past. Since you only remember the successes, thanks to that bouncer, and you combine that with all the filtered success stories from other people, you conclude that prayer does seem to work fairly well. In fact, with the most recent success, you are even more confident in the power of prayer than you were yesterday. What do you do now? Well, you pray again, thus starting the next iteration of the cycle. I mentioned that there are 4 stages, but there is another component, one that heavily influences stage 2, the bias feedback loop. It's a connection between stage 4 and stage 2. The more you believe in the power of prayer, the more allowance you'll make for a result to qualify as a success. The more you're willing to dismiss a failure as a failure, the more successes and the less failures will be stored into memory, the more you will believe in the power of prayer. And then the cycle begins again. That is a self-reinforcing delusion engine. Like any car engine, it'll reach a level of maximum performance, and it'll keep going until the cycle is either interrupted by honest critical thinking or the fuel runs out, meaning the person dies. It's possible that your prayer is actually being answered by a God that has not been demonstrated to exist. Of course that's possible. It's also very possible that the perception that prayer works is a combination of psychological factors only. You object, but I know prayer works. I've prayed for things that couldn't happen, and they did. I prayed for a new car and I got one. Prayer has always worked for me. I mean, I don't always get what I want, and sometimes things don't go my way, but prayer works in mysterious ways. You can't test it. Congratulations. Your delusion engine is at full power. Have you thought about the implications of what you're saying? Why can't we test God? Whenever we test prayer, we find that the results are indistinguishable from statistical noise. You say that we need to believe on faith, and that he can't allow evidence of his existence. But prayer could be that we have psychic powers, and a God isn't required, so that bypasses the evidence for God part. The connection between God and prayer is tenuous in the first place. If you're right, shouldn't that mean that we need to ban all prayer testing? Is God fine with allowing people to suffer, not helping them, just so a tenuous connection between prayer and God can't be empirically justified? Shouldn't we be preventing testing if that's the case? Wouldn't it be harming massive amounts of people to test prayer? In the end, not only is prayer working indistinguishable from prayer not working, but the implications of God sabotaging prayer whenever anyone tries to test it is disturbing. There is another, much more likely possibility to explain all this. No one is answering that prayer, and you can't tell the difference.